Have you ever been on a driving range and you had got to a point for your skill level where you couldn't hit it any better, and you have a moment where whether you say it to yourself or one of your friends who you're practicing with, that you've got it, you figured it out, and this is going to be the best ball striking day of your life. But then you go on the course and you hit it worse than you ever have before. You don't know which direction it's going, and it's just one of the worst days you could possibly have had. It's a major letdown. Well, if you answered yes, don't feel bad because you're not alone. We've all been there. Happens to golfers at all skill levels. But the solution is not to practice more, it's to practice better. And that's exactly what my guest today is here to discuss. His name is Dr. Will Wu, and he is a professor of motor learning at Cal State Long Beach. Now, Dr. Will is not a swing coach, but he helps take what you and your coach are working on and allows you to learn it exponentially better. Now, I'm not going to even attempt to try and describe what Dr. Will does any more than that, and he does a great job of saying that very early on in today's show. But he is helping students at all levels improve more readily and faster than they even thought they could. This was an awesome talk, and we barely even scratched the surface on on the motor learning field, and I'm definitely going to have Doc Will on again so we can continue to bring you this awesome information and to as many people as possible so you can start reaching the levels that you always knew you could. So please give it up for one of the best motor learning coaches in the game, Dr. Will Wu. What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Golf 360 podcast. I'm the host, Pete Popovich. So you may be asking yourself, what is Golf 360? And Golf 360 is a show that was designed to introduce you to people associated with the game of golf to help you improve not only at your game, but also your life. Almost all of our guests are from within the industry in some way, shape, or form, but some of the guests we have are from outside the industry, and it mainly revolves around the business world with a few others scattered in here and there. Now, all of the guests that we have a few things in common. One, they all were highly successful and accomplished in their field. Two, each has something to pass along that will help you in your game and your life. And three, they were all more than willing to give back by passing along the things that they used to help them in their career and even some of the mistakes that they made so that others don't make them in their journey. So I hope you find listening to them as enjoyable as I did interviewing them, and that each and every one of you benefits from the information that they so willingly and graciously pass along. This episode of the Golf 360 podcast is brought to you by Affinity Wealth Management Group. We all work exceptionally hard for our money, and none of us can afford to let that fall into the dark abyss of the big box financial service firms with their jack of all trades and master of none mantra, which basically means you become a number within a cookie cutter model, which is often accompanied by massive fees. Your future deserves more than average returns, and at Affinity Wealth Management, they ensure that your financial goals receive highly individualized, tailored attention from experts who are in the industry to be great and not average. As a client of Affinity Wealth, you will receive a customized solution to your customized life, keeping in mind your family's financial situation, values, and risk tolerance. Contact them today at 248-840-3863 or www.affinitywealthmg.com. This podcast is brought to you in part by Just Thrive Probiotic. You may be surprised to learn that your digestive system is the key to creating and maintaining the quality of your physical, mental, and emotional health, and it's one of the body's most essential systems. That's why the majority of nutritionists today highly recommend probiotics as an indispensable nutritional supplement. As a discriminating consumer, you've probably been searching for a probiotic that is proven, potent, and effective, and you found it. Just Thrive is your best choice for maintaining a healthy lifestyle. Just Thrive Probiotic captures the power of hundreds of thousands of years of nature's design with a specialized bacillus strain formulation that guarantees survivability through the stomach and upper digestive system. Supports optimum gut health, digestive health, immune health, and delivers antioxidants. Great for adults, kids, and the whole family. Use promo code GOLF360 at www.thriveprobiotic.com for 10% off your order. Okay, I'm here with the super smart Dr. Will Wu. Doc, Doctor, thank you for coming on the show. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for that.
For people out there that might not know what motor learning is and have tuned in, can you just give a description of that so someone who hasn't followed you or know who you are can kind of follow along if they're golf fanatics like most of my listeners are?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that question because it's a really undercover or maybe not publicized scientific discipline in the sports sciences or the movement sciences. I mean, simply stated, it's just basically the science of how we produce and control movements and how we learn new movements and how we refine existing ones. And so a lot of my students at the university level, they're aspiring physical therapists and occupational therapists.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a prehab rehab component, maybe more of a rehab component to the science, but there's also a major sports athletics component to it. And as you can imagine with golf, highly skill related activities, understanding how people control their movements and how they practice or learn them is critical, or it's highly important. So I think it gets a lot more traction in golf than some of the other major sports. Is in my kind of macro big picture perspective, golf seems a little bit more, or there's a segment of the golf coaches and golf population that's a little bit more science driven in terms of their application into the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're like that, you're looking for all the different ways that you can help golf performance. And so, a lot more golf coaches are asking about motor control and learning questions than there are, football coaches, basketball coaches, or baseball coaches. And so a lot of traction in golf because, the community seeks it.
How would what you do, how would that differ from, let's say, the learning intelligence model of somebody like the world renowned Dr. Howard Gardner from with the was it eight level or eight different learning styles?
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring up learning styles. I'll kind of address that in a little bit. I think one of the distinctions that you have to make um, with what I do what's called motor control and motor learning, and the key important part there is motor. It's how we're moving. There's a whole segment of learning, let's say within psychology,
Mm-hmm.
cognitive psychology, that deals with learning, and it doesn't really address how we move per se, right? A lot of their research is more about how we process information, how we remember certain things, how we can retain or enhance memory by various methods, whatever that may be. But motor control and learning, the distinction becomes the learning is not necessarily what you might learn from a book, but it's learning from learning skills, right? Skills that require some type of body movement. And then there's a whole component of learning in educational psychology. In educational psychology, they talk about learning too, and usually learning styles come from that. And I get asked questions all the time about learning styles, whether you're visual. Everybody says they're visual, believe it or not. But when it comes to motor control and learning, we have no scientific evidence for learning styles. Um, I was once asked this question. I was the motor control and learning principal scientist for USA Track and Field. And I had a really nice opportunity. I just worked with the athletes that they thought can win medals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was on that team for a while. And then the head sports science guy, had the question about learning styles because someone was trying to sell USA Track and Field some materials on learning styles. And then I had a double take because through my undergraduate career and my graduate work, that was something we never discussed or really talked about in the research or in any kind of research meetings or anything like that. So I was like, oh, let me, double check. So I asked colleagues, I do some reviews of my own. The only things that I come up with is basically there is no evidence in motor control and motor learning, right, as it's required to learn movements or control movements about learning styles. The only exception is really based on, and this is what I talk about with coaches. I run a coaching education program with John Dunnigan called the Skilled Coaching Alliance,
Mm-hmm.
where we teach coaches how to use motor control and learning. And so in our discussions there, I say really the only styles that we have for learning when it comes to movement is not necessarily a style, but it's based on what I call perceptual need. So there are aspects of movement, human movement, that require spatial orientation. So how you observe yourself in space,
Yes.
right? How you position yourself in space, or maybe even how you sequence yourself in space, or sequence yourself in an action. And then there's timing characteristics, and then there are force characteristics. So I say it depends on what the need is in the movement. So if you're looking at something like position, people are going to be a little bit more visually dominant when you're trying to learn position, because that's the best perceptual avenue to be able to communicate that. But try to learn force characteristics, right? Say you're on a force plate and you're looking at ground reaction forces of the golf swing. Try looking at that and trying to learn from that, right? You can't do that, right? And then also try looking at timing. You can't do timing either. And so people always say that they're visual learners until you give them something related to movement that you can't see. And so timing issues related to human movement are typically better done through the auditory system. So that's why you have a lot of kind of cadence, metronome work when you're learning timing. And then from a ground force or force perspective, that's going to be a little bit more proprioceptive in nature, and that's why I use a strategy called proprioceptive priming that helps. It's basically feel, getting people to understand feels, intensities of feels, and those sorts of things. And so in the motor control and learning context, there's really no learning style per se, right? I'll just leave that to the educational psychology literature, and from what I know of that literature, it's even kind of being debunked from that literature. But at least as far as motor control and learning, we don't have learning styles. It's just what part of the movement you're trying to learn and what's the best avenue to communicate that to the mover.
Right. Well, it makes sense. So the differentiation is, one is, as you mentioned, psychological, and how like you, I want to leave it to the academic world. I'm not even going to try to explain it. And if the listeners are wondering, just Google it, and you can get a differentiation between motor learning and intelligence learning. That we could do probably a series of podcasts on that. But I want to focus on what you do, and that's motor learning, because it's very beneficial if people are going to get introduced to you if they haven't already. And I think will help them immensely, because as Doc Scott, when he told me about you and what you do, once he described it, I said, yes, that is an avenue that has been, I think, left widely undiscovered by the masses.
Yeah.
Especially in the tech-driven world that we're in today, and not utilizing what you do with that. Yeah,
for sure. Scott has a really unique perspective, because we're friends, and we're collaborators in research on the academic side, but we also collaborate. Sometimes we overlap players on, the golf biomechanics side. And so, sport performance is like a pie, and you have different pieces that play their role. You have a strength coach, and then you have a nutritionist, you have a strategist, you have a swing coach, you have a biomechanist. Some teams are including, now that they're starting to discover motor control and learning, you have someone like me on the team. But Scott and I work in what we do. They're very complementary to each other, because you have the biomechanics part. How should we move, right? Whether it be moving safer or moving more maximally, which oftentimes don't go together. So if you want distance, there's a certain way you can move biomechanically. If you want to move safer, there's a certain way that you can move biomechanically. And so if you look at an analytical part, how should we be moving, what we should be doing from a movement standpoint, then that's the analysis part of it. So then how do you communicate? How do you teach? How do you train someone to be able to do the movements that the 3D analysis or the biomechanical analysis wants you to do? And that's where the motor control and learning part come in. The simplest analogy that I can make for that is a close colleague and friend of mine is Mark Blackburn, and we overlap, and we help each other with players and coaching, etc. And how we use it is, it's ingredients in a recipe. So the ingredients come from a swing coach. What do you need to do? And the recipe comes from the motor control and learning principles. How do you practice it?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why Scott and I, or coaches like Mark and I, have we have a very complementary relationship because of how we view the role of the different sports science component, particular motor control and learning. So it's how can we provide instructions from a coaching perspective that communicates more effectively to the player how they should move. It's one thing to say get your trail elbow closer to your trunk on the downswing, right? It's entirely different, statistically different, to say close the space between there. Now, people might think of that and go, oh, that's just a play of words. Well, it's a play of words, but it has a statistically different effect on your movement, right? This is not by chance or anything.
Sorry, not to interrupt, but would you say, to give the listener an analogy who might not be a scientific type and
Mm-hmm.
is trying to grasp hold of what you're saying, would that be kind of similar to the differentiation between, let's say, language amongst different parts of a country, or language in English compared to, say, Spanish, that there's not a direct translation? And that you could say the same thing, but each nationality, so to speak, would have a slightly different interpretation?
I would strip it down even more. At the fundamental level, are you getting people to think about their body while they're moving? Well, that's one way. That's the most common way. Or are you getting people to think about the effects of their movements while they're moving?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So a simple analogy for that would be lead wrist flexion in the downswing versus handle shaft orientation, right, in the downswing. And obviously, I mean, that's just an example, right, that highlights the distinction between the two. And so are you a player, or are you a coach that gives movement-related instruction to have the player think about their body movements? Or are you the type of coach, or are you the type of player that when you're thinking about your swing, you're thinking about the effects of those movements? So simple things like in the backswing, or at the top, pretend you're holding, a drink tray,
Mm-hmm.
those sorts of things. My dear friend and colleague John Dunnigan is awesome with this in the coaching world, where he uses belt buckle a lot. We use shirt buttons a lot. When
Plackets
you hear
on the
about
shirt, belt buckle. I use those a lot. In particular, as forms of measurement for where's the butt end of the club pointed at a dress.
Yeah. And it's really like those subtle plays on words, make significant changes, and they're real differences. They're things that we see in the research. There's a whole body of evidence in the research that highlight this, whether it be how you're activating your muscles, right? How you're using the ground, and we can measure it with ground reaction forces. We can measure it with 3D, whatever it may be. And even in the endurance world, right, when you don't focus on how your body is moving, your endurance capabilities go up. And so just the subtle play in words, you get a really strong benefit from it.
That's interesting. And I've got to have you on more so we can just get off on these tangents and just let rip. But I want to touch on a couple other topics, and one of them was not long ago I threw in my 2 cents, but there was some discussion on social media between some trainers and some coaches and other things on the difference between talent, which is what I considered, or what I assumed that they meant to be a predisposition to be good at something.
Yeah.
And my argument was, okay, define what talent is, first of all. And I said, if you're talking about a physical predisposition, like somebody who's 7 feet is going to be much more adept at playing basketball than somebody 5'2", or like a Michael Phelps who has a ratio, and I think David Epstein talked about this in his books. The physical predisposition to be good. If that's the definition of talent that we can establish from the beginning, yes, I believe that there's a talent, but I was leaning more towards no, it's a learning and a skill acquisition that will determine the difference between somebody's ability to perform at a better level than somebody else's.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's always the interplay between what I say, the gifts from mom and dad, what you get genetically,
Hmm.
and then the nurture component, which in my context is how good are your training and learning and instructional programs. And so from a motor control and learning perspective, we're born with motor abilities that mom and dad give us, and not everybody has the same um, level of motor abilities within a specific motor ability, right? We could just talk about speed of arm movement, right? If we were to really make it super simple and say, all right, everybody's born with a particular speed of arm movement, and not everybody is the fastest, right? Or not everybody can have the fastest arm speed movement. Some people are predispositioned to have it faster than others.
Like a type 2A, B, and C muscle.
Yeah, you can go on muscle type, right? But then there's also the motor abilities of just um, object interaction ability or object manipulation and object contact abilities, right? So like hitting balls or
Hmm.
being able to manipulate a ball. Like you have to orient a golf club. The accuracy demands to orient a golf club to be successful is very, very different from orienting a baseball bat to be successful. Um, and so those motor ability demands associated with that, people are born with those types of abilities, and some people are born with higher levels and lower level abilities. That's oftentimes the difference. Like a group of golf practitioners and we call them superpowers. Rory McIlroy has a superpower. Tiger Woods has a superpower. Dustin Johnson has a superpower. Those guys hit the ball far. What about Colin Morikawa? Doesn't hit the ball as far, but also has a superpower, and he's probably the best at tour with his iron play, right? So if we look at golf, every different player at the highest levels has a different superpower, and so that separates them from the talent, their motor abilities to the player. Maybe there's a player who practiced 2 times as much as they did, but didn't get to the levels. And so at the elite levels, it's always going to be an interplay of what you're born with and what you're nurtured with, or how you train and how you learn and how you're instructed. But one of the wonderful things about golf, and why golf is a part of my family in terms of us being participants in the game,
Hmm.
but also what I do from a research and a consulting standpoint. And the wonderful thing about golf, and the reason why it lends so well to motor control and learning, is because the tallest and biggest or heaviest player doesn't always hit the ball the furthest. Right? So the need for physical attributes such as height and weight are far less required in the skill of golf as, say, basketball or football. So because of that, there's a higher demand on the skill side. That's where a lot of differences come, is the skill side. So you have shorter players that play really well at a high level, like Xander plays at a high level being probably 5'10" or less. Colin Morikawa plays at a high level being 5'9". Roy McIlroy, same thing. Ricky
Hmm.
Fowler, the same thing. So a lot of short golfers. There are a lot of tall golfers that do that, but you don't necessarily find that. If we take if we make the analogy in basketball, how many Muggsy Bogues and Spud Webbs, guys that are under 5'10", that are best in the world in basketball?
Right. It's diminishing. Like Steph Curry is
Correct.
the only one that comes to mind now. That's it's like the
Correct.
NBA. It's like distance in the PGA Tour is starting to make some players obsolete. The same way the NBA seems to be gravitating more towards 7-footers with the ability to dribble, where 30 years ago that was unheard of.
Yeah, it's just the anthropometric requirements or the physical traits of other athletes are just weighted heavier in the other sports. Because you bring up Steph Curry, but Steph Curry's still over 6 feet tall, right? And then when Steph Curry was getting drafted, one of the knocks about him was that he was too short and he
Right.
was too light, or he was too weak. And now he's the best player in the NBA. But he's still over 6 feet tall. We don't go into golf saying you have to be over 6 feet tall to be successful. That's ludicrous, right? You can pretty much see, you can look at a player's ball striking and be like, that's a player, regardless of whether they're tall or short.
Hmm.
And when you talk about ball striking, right, that's someone's ability to not only coordinate their movements, but coordinate their movements with while manipulating object to manipulate a different object, right? And so that's really motor ability dependent, but it's also very skill dependent, and those can be nurtured and developed much more so than you can't nurture and develop height, right? Or even running speed. You can only nurture and develop running speed to an extent within what your physical abilities, your individual constraints, what your genetics allow you to do.
So motor skill development is a skill that can be developed regardless of what DNA you have from your lineage, what your size is or anything like that. It's something that you can be taught in a similar fashion that some of these, like a Bryson DeChambeau, has taken his distance game to a whole nother level.
Correct.
Motor skill development, it would fall into that category?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at, Bryson's a really good example. People see the distance that he hits the ball now, but what doesn't get talked about as much is how accurate he is at
that speed. Yes, that's amazing.
Like you have a lot of guys on tour that could probably hit it that far, but choose not to.
Tony Finau's brother comes to mind right away.
I was thinking about him too. And there's footage of him hitting it just as far, but he has to take a bigger swing. And I mean, I don't know anything about, Tony Finau's camp and what he does, but that's a good example of there are people who can hit it just as far, but they choose not to. And you have to ask, well, why do they choose not to? Right? It could be completely psychological, where they fear that they won't hit the ball as well, or it could be completely data driven, where they say, well, when I have this kind of club head speed and ball speed, the dispersion is this. Mm-hmm. Right? And strategically, they may be saying, I don't want to play with that. Right? I'm not privy to those, but you have to wonder why a lot of tour players can hit it, maybe not as far, but increase their speed to what they're playing with on regular tournament days. But he hits the ball far, he bombs it, but he's like a lot of times he's hitting the fairway with it also.
Right. That's a scary thing.
And so there's an accuracy component there that is not, I'm going to lift weights, right? Accuracy is not, I'm going to lift weights more and I'm going to lift weights faster. Accuracy is how I'm going to train it, or how my motor abilities allow me to orient the club face in a specific position where it won't go OB, or it'll stay in play. And so I think when you look at the very high levels, the elite levels, you always want to have the combination genetically talented and then awesome training and practice design and programs, right? That's the ultimate. There are other things that are associated with it, like what is their home life like, right? That viewers on TV never understand.
Yes.
There's all that external stuff, but yeah, we would love to have the player that has, genetic gifts and who's in an awesome training program. I think what I'm experienced with the players that I have professionally is they understand, they're like, hey, I'm at this level, on tour genetically, whatever it may be, ball striking wise, but I'm looking for the extra edge. And oftentimes that extra edge could be, I'm practicing for anywhere from 2 to 8 hours a day. How can I dial that in based on what the science is saying? Right? And so usually they come to me and I can give them evidence-based programs on how to learn better than their competitor is learning.
As you had mentioned practice plans, how would that differ, or how would it be similar to the periodization when I emailed you that like Dr. Greg Half discussed on the show, the Tudor Bompas of the world? So as it's related to weight training, is it similar to what you're talking about when you devise a practice plan for one of your players?
Yeah, it really is. When I was doing my PhD work, I was really fortunate to become really good friends and colleagues with a biomechanist who was a track and field coach and getting his PhD. His name's Mike Young, probably one of super talented, bright, strength. I guess you'd call him the strength domain, but he has a PhD in biomechanics. And so he introduced me to the world of track and field, where at the time the guys doing really, really good periodization within the track and field speed areas were guys like Lauren Seagrave, Dan Paff, and Mike and Bouchek's Nader, and Mike was, kind of the young guy in that tree. And I was immersed in that, being a motor control and learning person, right? I didn't come from a strength background, at least in a sport performance strength background. And so I was immersed in that in graduate school. I was immersed in that by my associations with them, and by the work that I did with USA Track and Field. So that influenced how I view skills and how I reviewed the literature and skills in the research, and kind of saw how people needed to progress based on certain motor learning variables that needed to change. And that's why I'd say there's strength periodization, but there's also skill periodization. So where someone starts, where I start with a tour player is very, very different with how I start with a junior golfer, right? A competitive junior golfer. How they progress is completely different. My two kids play competitive junior golf, and how I design for them is very, very different from how I design from a tour player. While there might be common elements, where we start and how we progress is very, very is different.
Does that have to deal with, as it was in the old Russian, Bulgarian literature, you have the different ages of chronological, biological, and training?
There are components of that, right? So then we're talking about like youth within the developmental stages of youth, and what you want to stress and those types of things. So that plays a part also. And so if we take youth, for example, like my daughter is 9 and my son is 12. Just by comparing him and looking at his physical traits, he's probably hasn't really started puberty in its real sense, and my daughter obviously has not. And so how we do physical training and skill training, those proportions will change based on their maturation rates. So I'm not going to be as willing to spend time until I can get a hormonal bump on a decent amount of physical training, although they do physical training, but the investment is a lot less because they won't get that hormonal bump, but there are other things that they get from it. So that distribution changes as they mature. But it's more the difference between juniors and adults. The reason why they differ on where I start them in a skill training program is competitive juniors and tour players is because I can give something for a tour player and it's just way too easy and simple for them. Like they'll get it right away. So it's just like it's a rep for them, but it's not a very fruitful rep for them. But because the juniors don't have as much experience, they need those additional reps, right? Or those doing the same thing a little bit for a little bit longer. So it has to also do with their experience with the activity and the knowledge gap.
Yeah. So I have always said when I do a beginner's clinic and I get a lot of, they're gung ho to get going because now they've taken the step to at least take some instruction. They've been to the range a number of times and they're getting frustrated because they're not advancing. So they'll take a group clinic. And I tell them, especially because I know that they're so anxious to get better that they want to go out and practice every day. And I've always told beginners or novices, whatever the word you want to use, that it's far better for them to practice more often for shorter durations because their brain is not going to absorb and their muscles don't have the strength for what the act that they're performing. And if they try to go long periods, they're not going to absorb it. You might as well spin your wheels.
Yeah.
But longer, the better players can practice for extended periods of time, but then they would take more time off for the adaptation to take hold. Is that on the right path?
No, totally. Yeah, you're right on. You're right on with that. There's a concept called practice distribution, which says work spread out over longer periods of time is better than the same amount total hours of work in a shorter period of time. And there are a variety of reasons for that. I think one of the things that you have to account for, we talked about intelligence learning at the very beginning. That's different from motor learning. Is a physical workload capacity that you have to consider with learning motor skills. So on the very high levels, like with the tour players that I work with, a lot of them are monitoring their workload, right? So workload may adjust, or what I do with them may adjust based on what their workload is or how the quality of their sleep may be. you have to account for things like that, or you have to account for, did they do something really heavy in the gym that may have an influence on how they're developing their skill, right? So those have to be accounted for. A good friend and colleague of mine, Ben Shear, probably one of the best in golf in physical training.
Yeah,
We have a
he's
lot of
earmarked for me to reach out and come on the
yeah.
show. So if he's listening, you're going to get a note from me.
Yeah, he's a good one. We collaborate a lot on players, and the conversations that we have about what is appropriate, when is appropriate, based on our respective pieces, is a very important for a player who's looking at small margins of improvement, even large margins of improvement. And so, some people, like players that have built a really good team, are looking about how you integrate these pieces, right? Some other players don't even have the pieces, right? So there's like a gap there. There's a gap with some players, and that's what the race is right now. The race is some players understand and are looking to build the right team, and some players maybe have a team and there are just less parts to the team to contribute to, the really small margins that they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's, in my opinion, with coaches, the coaches that I work with, in my SCA program with John Dunnigan is, they're the coaches that are going, okay, we have a good handle on the different ways that you can swing, right? It's not even the method coaches. Right. So you have some coaches that are just teaching one swing and they're good with that. These are coaches that are saying, okay, I understand my toolbox is big to be able to fit a player to how they would swing well. Now they're saying, how can I communicate this better? How can they train better? How can I teach this better? And usually those are the coaches that, I have a lot of interaction with.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Mark Blackburn, and I've talked about this with students and colleagues that say, and because I said when Mark got National Teacher of the Year, I said he is exceptionally deserving, and some local people didn't know about him, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, and this is not a knock on any of his tour players, but if you took his tour players and put them up against the DJs and the Brysons, they would not look as athletic, meaning that their swing would not be as we talk, let's call it natural or talented. But I said he what he's getting out of his players and them winning and competing on a regular basis, I said that's genius unto itself.
Yeah, he's maximizing. And the other thing you could look at too, which is I think a hallmark of a really good coach, is do all your players swing the same way?
Correct.
And if you look at his players, they don't swing the same way.
Not even close.
And he's done, he's done a really good job of. And there's a group of coaches that do this well, is they say, how do you move, right? They test and assess, and what swings work for you based on how you move. I really think it's, there's an evolutionary process in every discipline, right? If you just kind of look at labor forces, I mean, things are becoming automated now, right? It's the evolution of labor, so to speak, like I put that in air quotes. There's an evolution of coaching, right? From a big world perspective. If you look at baseball, the coaches who are embracing advanced statistics are doing well. If you look even to basketball, right? And how I look at it in golf is the golf coaches who are interested in how we motor learn or how we learn movements better, they're going to further separate themselves from the coaches that are still, like teaching like it's a biomechanical analysis. And there's all sorts of, they're looking to get constantly better rather than staying in those, in those areas. And, I often joke about this, with John Dunnigan. I'm like, dude, there are like some people that call themselves motor learning experts, John, and I'll put you against them any day, right? Just because of how he knows this stuff. And, guys like Mark and John, the same way. It's not about, they're to the point where to them, it's not so much about what they know of the golf swing, although they're still investigating the golf swing. But the difference maker is how they can get their players better. And it's not oftentimes, the quantitative movement per se, but it's how they're communicating, how they're dealing with players that, the off course stuff, how are they orienting them in those types of situations. And so, I think those are the coaches with kind of cutting edge approaches to being better coaches.
Yeah. And the information's out there with things like Apple Watch or Garmin or the Aura rings and all these things that are quantitative to measurement and giving information and feedback that if like as you're developing these things and a player says, well, geez, after their round, I need to go out to the range and work on this. And you or someone else there says, no, we think go ahead and hit a few putts, but based off what the data we have, you need to go back to the room and just chill out.
The load might be a lot lower. And, that's kind of one of the luxuries that I have working on teams is I always have to preface this, whatever players, coaches, whomever ask me, they're like, oh, can you help me with the golf swing? And I go, no, you don't understand. I'm not a golf coach. I'm not a golf coach. Back to that ingredients recipe scenario is if you have the ingredients, then I can build a recipe, right, for the ingredients that you give me. But I need ingredients, whether it be from a biomechanist or primarily it comes from a coach. And so, my interaction with players works in a variety of different ways. Sometimes I work just with a coach primarily, and the coach distributes that information to the players. Sometimes I interface with only the player, and then the player gives me ingredients from the coach that way. And so my relationships or how I interact could be in a variety of different ways, who I'm seeing, who I'm talking to the most. Mm-hmm. But really all it comes down to is I need ingredients to be able to do my movement change programs. There are skill change programs that I can create, and I usually base that off of, their golf statistics. Those sorts of things are easy to identify weaknesses in the games and then program around those. And there are also, other things that you can program around, but the movement related things, I need ingredients from coaches to be able to, and it works both ways. So I always tell players, it's like, if what your coach tells you to work on is not good for you, I will train really well. I will give you a program that will train you really well to swing how you're not supposed to swing. Right? It works both ways. And so it's kind of goes to show how important those ingredients are. Like, I don't never minimize what I do. Some coaches that are fearful see what I do and say I'm infringing on their territory, right? I think those are the coaches who don't have such a good understanding of what I do. The coaches who do, I actually emphasize the need for a coach, because what I do doesn't happen unless you have those good ingredients. And you have to have not only good, you have to have the accurate ones.
And there has to be a crossover at some point. I'm very good friends with a guy named Mike Obarski, and Mike he's 70 now, but he has been club fitting for 40 years. And he's got data on 35,000 fittings over that time. And he's got more data on club fitting than just about anybody I know. And he's exceptionally good at what he does. And when I was playing in early 2000 to 2006, he was working with some tour pros on their clubs, and one time one of the tour coaches got mad at him saying, you're supposed to do the clubs, you're not their swing coach. And he said, look, if their older clubs were causing them to have a swing issue, and they come to me and I say, here's what was being caused and here's what I took out, so you don't have to do this anymore. He said, that's not swing advice. That's just telling them the cause and effect relationship of what they had to do versus now what they don't have to do.
Yeah.
And then once that was ironed out, things work smoothly. But I could just see what you're saying, to where you have a team and there might be an overlap. And if egos get in the way of the wrong coach, and you're trying to help somebody, you're like, hey, I'm not coaching their swing.
Yeah. There is going to be a little overlap. And I think what you say, it's a team dynamic. And so one of the important things about a team is knowing your role within the team, and then being a good participant or member of that team.
Mm-hmm.
And so ego is always, especially if it's ego and you're not the player, right? Because really it's not about you, it's about the player.
Right.
They're the ones, right, that are hitting the shots. They're the ones that are putting in the time. And so, I think a lot of if you think about it that from perspective, is just you're just assisting them.
Yeah, you got to remember
Right?
that you're working for somebody who's a player, and you're all contributing. The goal for everybody is for that player's success, right?
Yeah.
So you could get lost in that a little bit and forget the direction the goal that you started from the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everybody has. It would be naive to say that people don't have egos. Everybody has an ego. It's just a matter of the extent and whether how they're applying or when the ego is being shown.
Have you read or heard of the book Peak by Anders Ericsson?
Yeah. I the yes, I
I
have.
thought that
I
was
have it.
a very interesting book.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me if I've read that was a follow up to a book that I think the results were misinterpreted. So he had to come out and write that book. I'm not going to name the book because just read Peak and you don't need to worry about the other book.
Yeah, the other book was about 20 years ago, wasn't it? The original that he put out.
It was a bestseller. The author writes some other books that I'll just keep it to this. It was a really bad interpretation of Anders Ericsson's work.
Okay.
And Anders Ericsson, I think he saw that, so he goes, I need to make this better because he used his name and he used his research. So just read Peak. That's a much better book. But people ask me if I read the book. I didn't read the book, but my wife and kids and I will always make fun of me because I don't read books. And I go, I don't read books because I read textbooks and research articles. And so I didn't read Anders Ericsson's book, but I was very familiar with all of his research articles, my graduate and postgraduate work.
One thing I want to ask you about, because I listened to one of your lectures online, and I found it fascinating. And I was, if this would have been a number of years ago, I'd have said, God, he's crazy. There's no way this can be true. But as you get older and you learn some things, and that was about hand dominance in particular.
Yeah.
That example, and I'll preface it with where I came from and the question I have first, and then I'll explain a little bit on why I have a better understanding of what you're talking about. So my question would be is because you had used the how kids will reach for something with one hand, and my question would be if they're still don't have any really mental development or nervous system development to be predisposed to have one side develop over the other, why would they reach with one hand more often than the other? And then the reason that I do find that topic very interesting and believe how you said it's a development of skill, because you don't use people, especially in this country, will use one hand predominantly and not use both. Is many years ago I did martial arts, and some of the teachers would show us video of Chinese artists where and this was in a Tai Chi class where they were painting those beautiful waterfall type paintings, and they'd be painting one section of the painting with one hand and another section of the painting with another hand. And because they were talking about balance and you had to, this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, it hit me there that yes, you can develop yourself to do things regardless of what you might be told as a kid or you might think.
Yeah.
So it is. That's why I said, when you said that, I said, yeah, 10 years ago, I said, he's crazy, but I do understand it. But to my question, wouldn't a kid, based off their DNA or their structure and everything else, be predisposed to have a hand dominance?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's just take, for the sake of argument, let's just say, okay, someone does have a predisposition, right? Like you have your right-handers and left-handers. It still doesn't mean that they can't develop their other side as equally as well as their quote unquote preferred or chosen side. And so way back in the day, my childhood, my brother played baseball with a kid named Jimmy Edmonds. And I don't know if that name sounds familiar with you, but
familiar.
Jimmy Edmonds won a think he won a World Series with the Angels, and then he played for the St. Louis Cardinals. But Jimmy Edmonds was a right-hander, naturally.
Mm-hmm.
But his dad was he was originally going to be a pitcher. He was an outfielder and really good hitter. He was a really good center fielder and left-handed hitter in the major leagues. But his dad was originally, when he was young, training him to be a pitcher. And he said, well, left-handed pitchers are going to be in more demand, right? So you're just going to throw left, and you're going to throw left and hit left. And so he threw left, but he's a natural right-hander. And so I think there are a lot of, you can look at the tour players that can hit the ball left-handed.
Well, I mean, right? Mac O'Grady would probably be the prototype for that.
And I think you just imagine the number of reps that they do one side compared to the other, mm-hmm. and how good it looks the opposite way. So I look at it more from, my undergraduate advisor, the late great Dick Schmidt, who passed away a little while ago. He authored the schema theory, which basically described what was called the generalized motor program. And that has a lot of evidence, or has a lot of support in the research. It basically says people have these motor programs that allow them to complete or execute different kinds of actions, right? So let's just, for simplicity's sake, we'll take the golf swing, right? It's a little bit more complex than that, but we need to simplify here. He says, well, the motor action, say the motor program for the golf swing is not, is for the right side and left side, right? The right side and left side are just details of the same motor program, right? And it's just what we decide, what we choose to practice more. Mm-hmm. So from the generalized, or from schema theory, there really isn't any right side, left side mention at all. It's just, what is the action? What are the important components of that action? And what are the details of that action? And then you train accordingly. And so, and there are a lot of examples. I mean, this is something that I've done with my son. My son started off playing competitive baseball. He was on a really good baseball team, was a really good hitter on a really good baseball team. And he had left-handed. And that was a choice, right? There's a strategic choice by me, because left-handed, you're close to first base. Left-handed, I knew that he was going to play golf right-handed. And I knew that over his lifetime, he was going to swing a ton from the right side. So I wanted him to swing baseball bat from the left side, because both are asymmetrical movement activities. Right. And if you look at any of the predictive injury-based studies, a lot of it has to do with asymmetry, body asymmetry, right? Or muscular asymmetry. And so that was just me doing that. And he's a really good hitter in baseball, although he was quote unquote right-handed, right? He threw right-handed. And so in his younger days, he doesn't play baseball anymore. He just primarily plays golf and surfs. But in his
kid got it made. He better enjoy it now.
I mean, the kid surfs in the morning and then he plays golf in the afternoon. I'm like, that's a heck of a two-a-day, man.
I envy that kid.
But I mean, then he just plays golf. But if he picks up a baseball bat, he's swinging that thing left-handed. And then, it comes in handy in some areas where he has to hit a golf ball left-handed because of lie or something like that. It'd come in handy. But yeah, I think we limit ourselves if we think about right-handedness, left-handedness, especially at a higher level, because if think about accuracy. Accuracy isn't side dominated, right? It looks side dominated because we practice more with our right than our left. But accuracy, like me throwing a ball to a target, is not side dominated. And so, like, if I grew up, right, nurturing a pitcher, and that pitcher could throw not equally as well, but almost like relatively good with the non-preferred side, from an accuracy training standpoint, you know how I double my accuracy workload training if I could do that. Right? Because now why do pitchers rest in the major leagues? Because right side dominant, they got the resting arm. So what are they doing? So for me, from a motor control standpoint, I'm like, man, if there's anything they could do to work on their accuracy, but not, um, increase unduly increase the workload of their body, that would be fantastic. Um, and so
Would it
one of
be
the ways they could
throwing
do that,
left-handed on off days?
throw with the opposite hand,
So
because then you can
would
work on that
you
accuracy
would
component.
prescribe to them, say, go play catch with your opposite hand?
I would do that, yes. That would be something like low level, better than sitting around watching.
Just doing nothing. Like they sit in the bullpen
Yeah.
with their jacket on and they're spitting their sunflower seeds all over the place. It's better that they
Yeah.
would throw.
Yeah, I mean that was something. I think there's a trainer called his name's Vern Gambetta. Um, I met him just briefly during my graduate school days, and he was a strength coach, I believe, at some point for the White Sox, and he was actually talking about doing those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's understanding the accuracy thing from a motor control standpoint isn't necessarily a side dominant issue, right? The accuracy thing is just your ability to organize your movements, right? Regardless of whether it's right, left, with your using your arms or legs, it's your ability to organize your movements in a way that it propels the object to where you want it to be, right? So it really just becomes a movement organization and coordination challenge.
And it wouldn't be the same for each side based off a number of different factors.
No, I mean, I think naturally, like if you're a right-handed pitcher in the game or you're right-handed golfer in tournaments, you're going to be competing with a quote-unquote preferred side,
mm-hmm.
right? So that's going to be trained more. So, I mean, in perfect, so you're going to be, the non-preferred side is going to be quote-unquote weaker in strength, right? You won't be able to hit the ball as far in golf, or you might be less accurate. But think of all the other things that you'd be doing maybe from a asymmetry, accounting for the asymmetry in the golf swing and the development that occurs, range of motion, muscle tissue, etc.
Right.
That you would be balancing out, etc. And at the same time, working on skill-related things such as accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'll just kind of use that as a very, very general term, accuracy. Right. It could be accuracy of face contact, or be accuracy of where the ball lands. But you could be working all of those things if the other side didn't work. Like my good friend and colleague John Dunnigan. I think he's a right-handed golfer, and I think he had a left shoulder issue. But his daughter loves to play with his daughter, so he just learned how to play. Sometimes he'll play golf left-handed because he wants to play golf with his family. And so it's not as good as the right side per se, but he can move the ball around pretty darn good. You see it from the left side. It's pretty darn good. And so I'm just saying that's just complementary stuff, right? That you can do. It's not bulk of what you're doing training wise. We're just talking about some complementary things that can happen.
I've been wanting to ask you this question because it used to drive me crazy. When I was getting off of my professional playing career was when I was getting into judo and jiu-jitsu. And I would still...
I trained jiu-jitsu also.
All right. So,
it's so good.
So yeah, it was a love-hate relationship. I hated going to the gym, right? Because I knew I was going to get beat on. Like I was a white belt, and it was just torture. But then when I left, the sense of accomplishment was phenomenal. I loved it.
Yeah.
I couldn't wait to go back.
You're always glad that you stepped on the mat afterwards.
Yes.
But getting there, there's a little...
And you're basically thanking somebody for kicking your ass for a couple hours. But what drove me crazy was, because all right, so I would still play golf during the day. I'd hit balls because, I wasn't doing a lot of lessons yet, and I was just segueing into it. And if I would play and then go to class that evening, it was like my brain had trouble making the changeover from being, and I don't know if it was being a elite at one level and then beginner at another, but there was just something that did not work. And I'm just like, why is it so hard sometimes to turn one off and the other one on?
I actually think there is quite a bit of similarity. Some people, have some MMA jiu-jitsu friends who like kind of look at me weird, but I think there's a lot of similarity between golf and jiu-jitsu. And one is, if you've ever trained jiu-jitsu before, you know that it's more than just about being the strongest. Obviously, the strongest helps, but the biggest guy doesn't always win in jiu-jitsu.
No, it's a chess match.
Yeah, and there's a lot of skill associated with jiu-jitsu, and you know that when something has when a sport has a high demand of skill associated with it, it's not always a try harder sport. So oftentimes you can try harder in jiu-jitsu, but it's not you're not getting a return on your effort investment. Same as golf, right? Golf is not a try harder sport like defense is in basketball. You try harder in golf and see how that works for you. Golf is more about have you developed the skill properly over a given period of time.
And can you implement it at the right time?
Correct. And so that's why I always think that there's a really, really close similarity in terms of skill demand from jiu-jitsu and golf, is because you have to be skilled and coordinated or know the technique really well. And having, mind you said, jiu-jitsu is primarily built for the weaker, smaller opponent to be able to survive the bigger opponent, right? And so by nature, because it's for the smaller, the smaller athlete or the smaller fighter, you have to be skilled at what you do. I always found that they were similar in that area. I oftentimes would train in one day and play golf in the other day. I just couldn't get over the physical associated with doing golf in one day. So more power to you. But yeah, oftentimes I think you have a very, very astute point. You're probably a very proficient mover in golf. And you imagine all the years of experience and training you've had in golf. And then now you're just getting your ass kicked.
Oh yeah. And I even
getting your ass kicked.
I even told the sensei, I'm like, I said, look, I go from this world that I don't even have to think and it's a reaction and I can perform and get the result I want a lot of the time. I said, I come here and I have I don't know how to read the other person because I'm just a beginner. I mean, jiu-jitsu, it takes you a year or longer just to get your yellow belt. And I said, I don't have any ammunition, so to speak, to when you do your grappling or you do your stand up or your groundwork. I said, I don't. That was so frustrating to go from one in a day to anything I want, and then the other one, I have nothing.
Yeah, if we were to go super nerdy motor skill explanation for that, think about golf. The demands in golf are very, very different from the environmental demands of jiu-jitsu. So in golf, everything that you need to build a shot or a plan for a shot is right there in front of you. Why? Because the green is not moving. The ground is not moving. It could be different, but you know what it's going to be when you hit the ball. The ball doesn't move, right? So nothing in your environment moves in the way that it affects the way that you move. It's all there. All the information is there, right? You have all the answers. But in jiu-jitsu, it's completely different. Your opponent is moving in various ways. And so based on how your opponent is moving, even if you're applying just one technique, the technique is going to need to be modified based on how your opponent is moving. So there's you need to create a little bit more abstraction from the jiu-jitsu technique based on how people are moving, whereas golf, nothing is changing from the moment of time, from the moment in time, at least in a way that it affects your movements in your environment, from the time you start your backswing to the time that the ball connects with your or meets your club face. Unlike jiu-jitsu, right, where your opponent is moving in
constantly
a variety of
moving.
different ways.
Was that? Yeah. I think I saw on your Instagram or somewhere that your brain seeks inconsistent movement, but in golf, everyone seems to be working towards consistent movement.
That's the crazy thing. Like if you look at our movement research, usually healthier populations, there's a certain amount of variability that healthy moving populations exhibit. And there's a reason for that, right? There's an injury survival reason for that, for us to be able to move variably. So we are variable movers. But then you have, golf technology is really, really good. I'm a huge proponent of it, and I use it, and I have all of it in my lab. But if you're going like, if you're trying to get consistency to like the 0.01 degree or even the 0.1 degree, you may not have an understanding about how variable we may be.
Right.
Right. And chasing the,
is it even attainable with the human element?
Yeah, it's just basically, I mean, it's all a play on words, right? You can't repeat a movement the same way. Like in golf, you're going to drive yourself mad, right? Thinking that. I mean, we can get to outcome numbers in the same way, but the movements might be a little bit different. So I can get my face orientation in a similar way, but my movements are going to be subtly different.
Yeah, it's called being human, isn't it?
Yeah. And so I think it's important to understand how inherently we're variable, and then just have that in the back of your mind as you're training. Like even at elite levels, right? You could be a top 50 tour player if you're trying to chase this unattainable level of consistency where you're just not going to get there, right? It's expectations. And we've learned through advanced golf stats that expectations are really, really important when you play golf. It's just the same thing for consistencies. And yeah, that post was just more about a demonstration of, hey, we're made to be variable movers. So just knowing that there's some certain guidelines as you're approaching high-end status or even whatever it may be, this golf performance path of how we want to be able to view things, or how we want to view progress, or just how we use the word consistency.
Yeah, so don't try to be a perfectionist, as golfers are notorious for trying to do, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a better word, is don't try to be a perfectionist. Just become more consistent.
Yes.
Just become more consistent.
Improve the best you can and be consistent, and let the perfect days fall where they may.
Yeah, everybody's going to have a dispersion at an outcome level or at a movement level. It's just, have you done your best to tighten what that dispersion is?
Cool. Let me, I know you got just a short amount of time, and I always want to get the rapid fire emergency 9 in. So if you got just a few minutes, we can run through those.
All right. Let's go for it.
All right. So the first and the last question I ask everybody, because they're kind of cool. And it was, if you were on the Ryder Cup, you're walking up to the first tee, what is your walk-up song?
Oh my gosh. It's probably going to be something from Rage Against the Machine.
That would get everybody going.
Yeah.
All right. Tour pro whose swing you'd most like to have?
Oh. I love watching Adam Scott swing, but I love the outcome and look of Rory McIlroy.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. There's a lot of players that you can't go wrong at any of them.
Yeah, but both of those are the two. I love to watch those two swings.
All right. Favorite line from Caddyshack?
Noonan. Well, actually, no. Noonan is 1B. The scream right before in the downswing is the best line for me.
All right. Best James Bond. Which actor played the best James Bond?
The current one.
Daniel Craig.
Yeah, Daniel Craig.
Okay.
And it's probably because it's like they're a little bit darker. I don't like the comedic kind of Disneyland James Bondy. I like the darker, grittier movies.
All right.
Or James Bond movies. Or even Batman.
Do you look forward more to the Masters or the Ryder Cup?
Oh my gosh.
I got to come up with some ones that stump everybody, even though it's rapid fire.
Jeez.
I got to make them think a little bit.
I have to choose one. I'm going to choose Ryder Cup.
Okay. I asked these, and there is no right or wrong answer.
It's not the right. If the answer for me is both, but I guess I'll have to. Today it's Ryder Cup. Tomorrow might be Masters.
Okay, fair enough. If you had an 8-foot putt, and if you make it, you get $1 million cash. But if you miss it, you can't use your phone for a year. Do you take the putt?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
Let's see.
I think there are health benefits to not using your phone for a year.
Oh, I could agree. I wish I could put mine. I need to learn to put it down more. Talking about skill, I lack significantly in that one. If you could play around with any celebrity, who would it be?
Oh man, Dead or alive?
Anyone you want to.
Dead or alive?
Yep.
Jesus Christ, a celebrity?
I would have to classify that, yes. It is. Known around the world throughout history, I would say yes.
I would do that because I think you can get a lot of answers, either whether you're a person of faith or not a person of faith.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a very cool answer, by the way. Would you rather speak all languages or to all animals?
Oh, all animals. That one's, yeah.
Me too. I'm a big dog guy. I got 2 dogs myself. I
have a 100-pound Bernedoodle.
That'll keep
He's
you
only
busy.
3 years old.
And the last one, in your opinion, as far as the golf world is concerned, who's the greatest of all time? Who's the GOAT?
Because it's my generation, I'm saying Tiger Woods.
Yeah, it has been a generational answer. Of the age of the guest. I could classify, based off somebody's age that comes on, I could tell you, I have a column of who said what, and it's pure generational.
Yeah. I mean, even that, I'm not super happy with the answer.
That's why I put it in there. It makes people think.
I gotta go. I gotta go. That's what I'm gonna go with.
No problem.
But that's not gonna change on a daily basis like the Ryder Cup and the Masters.
Cool. What do you? Anything coming up? Lectures or online classes you're doing? People can check you out, follow you, do all that stuff.
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Yeah, so I have. So John Dunnan again, and I have another semester 1 of Skilled Coaching Alliance. You can go to www.skilledcoachingalliance.com for semester 1. That's our intro level course for any golf instructor. Even if you're a player, you'll get a lot out of it. If you want to learn how to infuse motor control and learning into golf, and then. We have a semester 2, which is we're super excited about. That's our in-person one. That's a higher level where you get hands-on, more advanced concepts, but that's just for people who have completed or are in semester 1.
And that's www.skillscoachingonline.com?
Skilledcoachingalliance.com.
Let me write down, because I'll put the link in the show notes. Skilled Coaching
Alliance.
Yeah. .com. Yeah. For everybody listening, just go to the website. I'll have the direct link to that. I'll have the link to all your social media stuff. People can follow you.
Sweet.
Anything else you got coming up?
Yeah, I have a couple talks at some PGA sectionals. I think there's one in the Northeast. So if you're in there, I'll be doing a talk with John Dunnigan. And then there may be some golf articles coming out with some pretty good coaches for the hard copy or online stuff with some cool things for you all to read.
Cool. I look forward to it. Everybody, check out Dr. Will Wu. Again, all the links will be in the description, show notes. Doctor, we got to do it again.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And if anybody wants to follow me on social media, you can probably best is my Instagram, which is just Dr. Will Wu.
Okay, and that'll be in there. It'll be one click away, and they can start. Sweet. You'll be inundated with followers after this.
Sweet.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you for the time. You have a great night.
It was my pleasure. You too, Pete. See ya.
Bye-bye. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you enjoyed it, you can find more information on today's episode and other topics at golf360.blog. There you'll find the show notes and links related to this episode, as well as any other episode that we've done so far to date. If you're interested in improving your game and would like to learn more from yours truly by taking a private lesson, a half-day or multi-day school, club or putter fitting, you can reach me through the blog site or by email, pete@golf360.blog. So some of you may be asking, what is the golf paradigm? All you have to do is click on the homepage while on my blog site to discover how you can start playing better than you ever thought possible. Or you can simply sign up, again, on the blog page for my instructional videos where I give regular tips on all areas of the game to include the swing, club design and fitting, health, fitness and nutrition, the mental aspects, and equally as important, the integration of all those things together. I'm also on social media, and you can find me at The Golf Paradigm. That's Paradigm. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, also under the same name, The Golf Paradigm. Facebook is usually the best way to reach me for questions and or comments, and I look forward to hearing what all of you have to say. This podcast is brought to you in part by Old South Golf Links. A short ride across a bridge from Hilton Head Island is one of the area's finest golf courses and a hidden treasure. Set up on towering pines and ancient oaks with sweeping marsh vistas, truly makes Old South Golf Links a one-of-a-kind golfing experience. The Clyde Johnson design was named one of the top 10 new public courses when it opened, and it also takes full advantage of the natural beauty of the Low Country. Old South is a fun and unique challenge for golfers of every skill level and a favorite of both locals and visitors. Whether it's your first time here or you're a regular, you'll be treated and feel like family. From the bag drop to check-in at the fully stocked pro shop with both men's and women's apparel, to breakfast or lunch before or after your round, the staff is always ready and willing to help. Experience for yourself why Old South is one of the premier golf courses in the Hilton Head area and why it will quickly become a favorite of yours too. Visit them in person or online at www.oldsouthgolf.com, or to make it tee time, simply call the pro shop at 843-785-5353.